Greetings and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching Design and Manage an Exchange Infrastructure. This is a primary subject for the 70-341 Core Solutions Exchange 2013 certification exam. The subtopic we'll be discussing for this lesson is Plan for Impact of Exchange on Active Directory Directory Services. Under the subject Plan for Impact of Exchange on Active Directory Directory Services, this objective may include, but is not limited to, evaluate impact of schema changes required for Exchange, prepare domains for Exchange, plan around Active Directory site topology, plan the number of domain controllers, plan placement of global catalog, and determine DNS changes required for Exchange. Okay, so let's get started. So, from a scenario perspective, we're going to be working with a Brazilian brokerage. The company name is Paraíso Brokerage. The firm handles private investment banking with locations in both Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. The problem is that they're looking to acquire a new firm that has Active Directory but no existing Exchange environment, and they're going to need to know what the impact will be and what the Active Directory configuration will involve. So our goal is going to be to assess the existing infrastructure and design the Active Directory elements prior to deployment. So we all know that there is a connection between Exchange and Active Directory. That connection has existed since Active Directory was released in 2000 with Server 2000, and Exchange was released the same year with Exchange 2000. Exchange stores all of its configuration and recipient information in Active Directory. Queries are constantly made back to Active Directory when an Exchange server needs configuration or recipient information. So you can see how essential it is for Active Directory to be available. Exchange is an Active Directory site-aware application, and it prefers to communicate with Active Directory servers in the same site. Upon startup, Exchange will bind to a random domain controller and global catalog in its own site. You can use the get-exchange server commandlet to discover which domain controller and global catalog server it's bound to, and you can use the set-exchange server commandlet to configure a static list that it should bind to, if that's something you want to control. So before implementing Exchange Server in your environment, you have to prepare Active Directory directory services. By default, it doesn't have the necessary classes, objects, and attributes defined for the Exchange server. So by preparing it, you extend the Active Directory schema, you also modify configuration and domain partitions of Active Directory. In addition, Exchange requires several groups and special permissions in Active Directory, and so these are also configured during the Active Directory directory services preparation. So let's start this discussion right at the core, right at the schema changes that are made within Active Directory and how we can prepare the schema to accept Exchange 2013. So there are schema configuration changes with Exchange 2013, which has been the case with every release of Exchange since Exchange 2000. So you're aware that the schema holds all of the objects and the attributes for those objects that are held within the Active Directory. So when you create a new recipient and there are various attributes that go along with those recipient objects, well, the schema has to know what those attributes are. There are a variety of other additional changes that have to be made within the schema to accept Exchange 2013. And in a moment we'll show you a list of the schema changes that are implemented with Exchange 2013. Now, to prepare Active Directory, you first need to prepare the schema, which can be done when you install your first Exchange server in your environment, or you can do this through PowerShell prior to the installation. The schema update is required so that you can add objects and attributes to Active Directory to support Exchange 2013. Now, depending on the size of your organization and how the infrastructure responsibilities are perhaps divided within your organization, that update may need to be done by another team or department. Another important point to keep in mind is that the replicating of the changes, depending on the size of your environment, well, that could take some time. It might take several hours or even days. And so it's really dependent upon your Active Directory replication schedule. So you need to make sure that after you make the changes to the schema, you give it an appropriate amount of time to ensure that the replication has occurred. And again, the amount of time is really dependent on your Active Directory site topology. If you want to do this through the command line, you use the setup space / prepare schema or setup / ps. You have to remember to use the I accept Exchange Server license terms part to that as well. That's a new thing with Exchange 2013. In addition, you can provide the specific domain controller that you want the system to use. Now, you must be a member of the Schema Admins and Enterprise Admins group in order to run the command in the first place. And it has to be run in the same domain and site as the Active Directory Schema Master. Alright, so first of all, let's take a look at the various changes that are going to be made when we do this type of a schema update to our environment. We'll take a look at a TechNet article that's also listed in the additional research at the end of this lesson, and we'll see all of the changes really quickly that we're going to have made when we do the update. And then after that, we'll do a demonstration where we show how the script works on an Exchange server. Obviously, we already have our Exchange environment up and running for the lessons that we've already discussed in the past. So this is a previous recording of the preparation of the schema for an Exchange environment. Alright, so here we have the Exchange 2013 Active Directory schema changes, and this is provided as a link at the end of the lesson under additional research. So you can look this up. You can see here it lists out all of the different classes that are modified, attributes modified, and so on as we go through. It's quite a bit. We're not going to take a lot of time here, but you can see that you can get a list of all of the different items, the objects and attributes and so forth that are modified with the schema updates that are made to Active Directory. So let's jump over to that server now and let's take a look at how this is done through the command line. Now keep in mind again that if you just did a straight install of Exchange through the GUI, it would just automatically do this for you. So the schema changes for your first Exchange server that you install in an environment, well, that would happen in the background and it would take some time. But in a small environment, let's say where you have a single site and you have a few domain controllers and you're installing Exchange, you can really just do it through the GUI and it will just do it for you. So it's not that you have to stress about this for small environments. This is really more for those enterprise level environments where you have a global deployment of Active Directory and you need to be aware of how this is going to affect that infrastructure that you already have in place. Alright, and here we are on our Windows Server 2012 system. And so at this point, what we've done is we have taken the ISO file for Exchange 2013 and we have it set up here. We've mounted it on this server. It's a virtual server, so we pretty much just use the settings in order to connect into that ISO file. And so here we have the files here. If we open that up, we can scroll down and we can see where that setup file is. And so we're going to be using this setup application right here in order to update the schema. Before we do that, we need to make a change in terms of the settings. We need to import a module and then we need to install a Windows feature, the RSAT-ADDS feature. And so basically this is for the remote set of tools. So if we open up our PowerShell here, what we're going to do is we're going to type install Windows feature RSAT-ADDS. Now, if you're working on Server 2008, before you actually use the add Windows feature, you're going to do import-module space server manager as one word, server manager. So that's something you're probably familiar with if you've worked with 2008 already, that you have to add the module. With 2012, you don't have to do that, and you don't use the add-Windows feature. Instead, you use the install-Windows feature, RSAT-ADDS. We hit enter. And we can see we were successful. Our remote server administration tools have been installed, and so we can move forward. It does give us a warning that our Windows Update is not turned on, and we'll turn that on, but we don't have to worry about that at this moment. So we have success there. The next part of the process is to use the setup command with the prepare schema. So let's clear the screen, and let's open up a command prompt. From the start screen, we type in CMD. It gives us a command prompt. We want an administrative command prompt, so we're going to hit Control-Shift-Enter to open up the admin command prompt. And from here, we're going to go to the D drive. From the D drive, we're going to type in setup/prepare schema, and we'll hit Enter. Now you'll notice that it says that there's no problem with using the prepare schema switch. It's not giving us an error message. It's giving us information. Pretty much, in order to move forward, we have to accept the license agreement. And so this is something that's new with the command prompt with preparing schema, preparing Active Directory, and preparing domains, is that we have to put in the switch that says we accept the Exchange Server license terms. So let's do that. We hit the up arrow, we get the command back, and then we put in the /I accept Exchange Server license terms, and we hit Enter. And we can see that it did a prerequisite analysis, and we completed that, and now it's extending the Active Directory schema. Okay, and so you see how easy that was. The schema was extended. We're all set to go forward. So if we wanted to, we could use the prepare AD and the prepare all domains switches in order to move forward and prepare our entire Active Directory. Alright, so now that we have seen the schema update through the command line, let's jump back over to our slides and let's talk about the impact of schema changes and how we might test for schema extension conflicts. As far as the impact of schema changes, you need to talk to your Active Directory management team before implementing a schema update. That's if one exists. If not, that's okay. You can still proceed and move forward. Most likely, if you don't have a specific team that's handling Active Directory, your environment is not so large that it requires that. And perhaps you may be the administrator that handles Active Directory and everything else in your environment. So in that case, then you certainly don't need to meet with yourself, but you do need to be aware that there may be an impact when you implement the schema changes. So what kind of impact? Well, depending on the size of your environment, again, we were talking about replication. You need to make sure that you allow for the time to replicate. The other thing is you should test the update in a lab first, just to make sure that there's nothing unfamiliar that's going to come your way. Perhaps something will fail, perhaps something that you weren't aware of. Exchange 2013 is still new, so you want to make sure that you're prepared for any type of scenario where some type of failure comes into play. You should back up your Active Directory before you apply the schema updates. Now, these updates have become so reliable that it's not like the old days where everything made us afraid, and so we backed up everything before we made any little change. Well, unfortunately, sometimes we get a little too confident, and even though the practical best practice advice is to back up the Active Directory in this case, you might just say, "Oh, forget it, I'll just do the schema update. What's going to go wrong?" Well, that happens, and a lot of times it works out great, most of the times in fact, but that leads to a false sense of security because there are times when things do blow up. So it's good to make sure you have that backup. Now, you can test for schema extension conflicts by using the AD Schema Extension Conflict Analyzer .ps1. And for more information about this conflict analyzer, you can see the link at the end of this lesson in the additional research section, where it links you off to further information about this conflict analyzer PowerShell script. Now, in addition to preparing the schema, you have to continue and prepare Active Directory itself. So you can skip the schema prep if you want, and if you have permissions, and you can jump right into the /prepare AD if your company policy allows for it. The /prepare AD will create the Exchange container, if one doesn't already exist, and will configure all of the organization information within, including role groups and so forth. To do this, you have to be a member of the Enterprise Admins group, and you should be in the same domain and Active Directory site as the schema master. Now, if you don't prepare the schema first, then you also have to be part of the schema admins group. So it just depends on how you plan on doing this. If you're in the schema admins group, then you can run the schema preparation, but you have to also be an enterprise admin in that case as well. So an example of how this would look is setup / prepare AD and then / organization name. And so if this is the first Exchange server in the environment, you have to provide the organization name. It's different if you're connecting up to an existing organization. Now beyond that, you also have to prepare the individual domains. Now, to prepare local domains, you can run the / prepare domain or / PD, but to prepare all domains, you can run / prepare all domains or / PAD. Now, when you run the / prepare domain, you can run that from within the domain that you're logged into, and so then it will automatically prepare that domain. If, however, you want to prepare a specific domain, you can use the / prepare domain and indicate the domain you're looking to prepare. What will happen is this will create the Microsoft Exchange system objects in the root domain partition. Now, keep in mind, to run the / prepare domain, you must be in the domain admins group in that domain. To run it with the prepare all domains, you must be a member of the enterprise admins group. And it's also good to note that if you're preparing a domain that was created after you ran setup / prepare AD, you must be a member not only of the domain admins group in the domain, but also you must be a member of the Exchange Organization Administrators group. Now, sometimes questions come up as far as whether or not you need to run this command in a domain or not. Well, keep this in mind. You must run this command in every domain in which you will install Exchange 2013. So that's a given. But you must also run this command in every domain that will contain mail-enabled users, even if the domain doesn't have Exchange 2013 installed. Now that is an important note, because a lot of folks don't understand that. A lot of Exchange administrators, they do not think about the individuals that will have mailboxes. So if you're going to have end users that will be mail enabled, then they have to have this command run as well. Let's talk for a moment about Active Directory infrastructure. So, global catalog servers. You have to have at least one global catalog server within the site location for Exchange. So that's important. For high availability, you should have two. As far as domain controllers, you should have at least one writable domain controller, and for high availability, you should have two. So read-only domain controllers are not acceptable. You need to have writable domain controllers. As far as forest functionality, it should be Server 2003 or higher. DNS support includes contiguous, non-contiguous, single label, and disjointed. And IPv6 is fully supported, but IPv4 has to remain installed. So you can disable IPv4 if you want, but you have to at least keep it installed. Now, Microsoft recommends, for both security and performance reasons, that we only install Exchange 2013 on member servers. So we don't want to install this on Active Directory servers. In fact, you can't run DC Promo on a computer running Exchange 2013, so after Exchange is installed and you have a member server, you can't change that member server now to a directory server, or at least that's not supported. So if you find some kind of workaround to make it work, well, they're not going to support that. So they really want you to install Exchange on a member server. But you still need the infrastructure in place that Active Directory provides. You can't install Exchange without Active Directory. So just looking at this from more of a design and deployment strategy, obviously you know you need at least one domain controller, one global catalog server, and then you need DNS services. You can use Active Directory integrated DNS if you want. And so in that case, you are set for Exchange. But that's not smart for availability. So it's always good to have multiple domain controllers, multiple global catalog servers, and multiple DNS services. And as you can see here in this slide, we're also showing how you might mentally want to prepare having multiple mailbox servers set up, having them configured in a DAG, using a hardware load balancer for your client access servers and having multiple client access servers in that case, using a JBOD array for your storage, although you can certainly spend more money and go with more expensive and high performance disk. Remember, Active Directory domain services and domain name system or DNS services are the two services that must be highly available in order to support highly available Exchange configurations. So it makes no sense for you to ignore the Active Directory side when it comes to redundancy and only focus on Exchange. So this is all part of the design and deployment side to the strategy that you implement with Exchange 2013. Now granted, this costs money, so we're not saying that you should break the bank to accomplish this. Every environment will be different. And from a certification exam perspective, that's what you need to look for. What parameters are given to you with regard to whatever scenario you're looking into? If it's a scenario where money is an issue, you need to look to reduce the number of servers and reduce the hardware costs that are in play. If money is not a concern, but really maintaining the highest level of availability is what you want, then you need to be able to design and deploy your Exchange environment and Active Directory environment in such a way that you really take into account every possible failure point. And we've talked about this in previous lessons as well, that there are failure points that sometimes we forget because we're so focused on making sure that we have redundancy of the mailbox server role. From a DNS perspective, Microsoft recommends Split DNS, which allows you to configure different IP addresses for the same host name. So it's also known as Split Horizon or Split Brain DNS. Using Split DNS can help you to reduce the number of host names that you have to manage, and it also reduces the number of SAN names required for your SSL certificates. So an example is where end users might use owa.company.com both internally and externally. Now, keep in mind, Microsoft recommends Split DNS, but it isn't mandatory. So it takes some work on your part to configure, to match your Active Directory domain with your external DNS. But when you configure this and you have your Auto Discover service in play, there is the internal URL, the external URL, and then there's the Auto Discover service internal URI. And these will all have to be configured appropriately depending on your DNS configuration. If you would like to learn more about Split DNS, you can research the subject, and to help you get started with that, at the end of this lesson, in additional research, there's a link to a blog post that will help you to get started. Alright, so from a scenario perspective with Para-ISU Brokerage, now they have a clearer understanding of Active Directory design and deployment concerns. They don't see the need to break things down, and they'll use the two commands /prepare AD and prepare all domains. So they're not going to prepare schema and then prepare AD and then prepare individual domains. They know that using these two commands, they'll be able to do all of the Active Directory configuration for their environment. And that will be the quickest way to do it from the command line. Obviously, if they wanted to do this using the GUI, if they had a smaller environment, then they could do it that way as well. They will also ensure that they have at least 2 global catalog servers in each site. They currently already have multiple domain controllers, but they're not sure if they have multiple global catalog servers. They also know they have multiple DNS servers already. They're using AD integrated DNS, so they're set in that case, but they're going to ensure that they have multiple global catalog servers. That will certainly assist with redundancy. Some additional research links for you to take a look at include the Exchange 2013 Active Directory schema changes, testing for Active Directory schema extension conflicts, and deploying Exchange 2013. That's a nice blog article that will help you to learn more about Split DNS. So we hope you found this informative. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.